to call this meeting to order. Do we have to do a roll call here, or don't see it on the agenda, but okay, let's start with a roll call. I'll start on my right here.
James Inkamp, City of Lafayette staff.
Paul Reinders, City of Pittsburgh, Transplant.
Suzanne Wilson here for Sean Dugan with the East Bay Regional Park District.
Greg Hay, SWAT.
Ole Olson, City of Pittsburgh, resident of Pittsburgh. I think I'm representing Federal Glover. I'm not sure. Transplant, okay. I'm a transplant.
East County. Joanna Pollock, WICTAC, West Contra Costa staff representative.
And Bill Pinkham, WICTAC, the citizen rep, and also Richmond Bike Pit Advisory Committee and a couple of others.
And Robert Sarmiento, Contra Costa County rep. All right, we'll go to item number 2, public comment. Do we have any members of the public who would like to comment? All right, seeing none, we'll go to item 3, approval of the minutes. We have the minutes from the CBPAC meeting on March 27, 2017 and September 25th, 2017. I might get a motion to approve, please.
Your turn, Bill.
Sure, I'll make the motion.
All right, we have a motion by Bill. Do I have a second?
Second.
All right, second by James. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right, that's approved. All right, we'll go to item number 4, review of the draft State of Walking and Biking Report.
Yes, thank you. I'll kick it off, and then I'll call up, I guess it's just Patrick to do this section, this item. So it's me, Brad Beck, CCTA, and Patrick Gilster and Megan Mittman from Fair & Piers, who will do the presenting today. And we're going to cover a couple of different things. The first item, which is item 4 on your agenda, which is the state of walking and biking overview. We'll also go into public outreach, the Countywide Bikeway Network and priority pedestrian areas, and then the draft outline for the actual CBPP that we'll bring to you for review in January. So here we are. We've done a baseline conditions analysis. We did a strategic white paper, and now we're in this reviewing the basic conditions, which is the state of walking and biking, and then preparing the draft plan. So we're on our way to an actual update. And the reasons for doing the update, understand where and why people walk or bicycle, try to focus a bit on the interested but concerned group that form the majority of the populace, harmonizing new local and regional plans, and there have been a number of new bike, ped, or general plan updates to comply with the Complete Streets Act, to improve our analytical tools, and finally to identify new gaps or be a little clearer about where gaps are in the network and needed improvements, including improved cross-barrier connections, or ABCs. So now I'll bring up Patrick to talk about the draft state of walking and biking. We unfortunately don't have any clickers, so I'm going to have to be doing the clicking for Patrick.
Good morning, everyone. I can actually talk this time. You remember last time I was sick and couldn't talk very well? So I'll try not to talk your ear off too much today. But every time we come, we have lots of homework for you guys. Last time it was the white paper, and this time is the state of walking and biking. Just so I can get reference on how much to go into each detail, how many have actually read the whole thing? Okay. Well, that just means I can talk more about
Gold star.
it. Bonus points. Okay. So to give you a brief overview, the state of walking and biking in Contra Costa is really meant to be the existing conditions assessment of the CBPP process. It gives the context for geography, local plans, how land uses will change, how employment demographics are slated to change. Kind of gives a sense of what travel patterns are like for a countywide purpose and in each RTPC, and then gives an assessment of the collision data. And a lot of this is done at the high level, regional level, but we've also tried to break it down to be a little more RTPC focused. In it, we have the bikeway network, the pedestrian network, and a cross barriers connection. So these look at, from the 2009 CBPP, what was in there and what are we looking at potentially changing. The cross barriers connections that I'll get into is really looking at how users get across both freeways and railways and waterways, and where there are gaps in connectivity along those types of facilities. With that, we'll go to the next slide. Sorry if this one's a little hard to see, just our graphic formatting, I guess. But really, the document starts out with the geographical context of Contra Costa, gives a little brief overview of the topography, and then talks about how regional plans are used and the RTPC's roles in creating the action plans used for the diverse areas of the county. So what we did in the state of walking and biking is we ended up doing a benchmarking assessment of the previous CBPP. So this was a way, the process was adapted from our, I'm blanking on the name of the actual report. The Pedestrian and Bicycle Safety Assessment through UC Berkeley Safe Trek that we helped develop. And it's normally meant for individual local jurisdictions, but we used it and adapted it for the regional plan to kind of give a state of where we're at. Ideally, we had wanted to work with each jurisdiction to answer a survey, but then didn't get enough responses to make it as useful as it could be in this report itself. So we'll likely refer back to those when actually drafting the plan itself over the next 2 months. So some of the opportunities that came out of that are the best practices that are not being met in terms of what's not addressed in the plan. It's not that these may not be happening on a different level, but that it's not actually included in the plan according to best practices. So those include things like ADA improvements and addressing those throughout the county, giving specific data collection and analysis requirements, and then the bicycle and pedestrian network development and facility design guidance. So that's all best practices could be included in those for the update. So many of these topics are also topics you heard or read from the white paper, strategic white paper. So local jurisdiction plan. So for this, we kind of looked at 3 different topics, ranging from whether or not each jurisdiction has a bike plan, a PED plan, or an ATP for joint ones, and then whether or not the general plans of each jurisdiction have complete streets ordinances included. So this kind of just gives a breakdown of where those are occurring, and then so where there are not plans, some of them are either in progress, such as San Ramon, and then Pittsburgh's coming up, and then the other ones are where the individual jurisdictions have thus defaulted to the CBPP as their plan in the past.
Yeah, excuse me.
Yeah.
Richmond does have a bike plan, or very early stages of
Yes,
thinking about
that should
revision.
be-
Yeah, and actually I see you got the PED plan back, but in the handout here it shows that we don't have a PED plan, but we do have both.
And they're separate, so they're not,
Yeah.
unlike some cities that are
They're
bike
separate,
peds,
yeah,
they're actually
yeah,
separate.
Yeah, it was Fear and Tears.
Yes, I was like, we wrote that one.
Helped
So
us.
that I think is just a table error. But thank you for pointing it out.
Patrick, if I have comments on the county, I have some comments on the county's checked off boxes and stuff. I would just follow up with you later on that.
Perfect.
All right, thank you.
So as part of that process too, we had originally at the start of the process for the update had reached out to each jurisdiction to provide their GIS files. So we will be updating. We have since updated the regional networks, and I'll get to this in a sec, based on those files for what are included in the from the jurisdictions that have recent plan updates. So part of the state of walking and biking gets into the regional context in terms of land use and employment. So this is from the CCTA travel demand model, and we kind of have adapted its use to look at TAZs and what their growth looks like. So this is in 2010 when the model was developed, kind of where are the household densities and employment centers that are being assumed in the model. And I'll get to how we can kind of take this and use it in the future. So kind of some key things along here that a large concentration of jobs are actually located along the 680 corridor, both in San Ramon, in Walnut Creek, and in Pleasant Hill, Concord. Industrial uses are located generally in the Richmond shoreline area. West County and large parts of Central County and East County are characterized by high and medium density housing. And then low and very low density housing is predominant in Southwest County, except in some of the jurisdictions more downtown areas. So it's relatively concentrated there. And then Contra Costa as a whole has a large swath of undeveloped land. So some of which are natural barriers in between some of these locations. And then the changes. So based on CCTA's travel demand model, or transportation demand model, sorry, I should say, we used the inputs from 2040 to look at what will be happening over the course of the next, or what could happen, I should say, over the course of the next 20, 30 years. So low to moderate household growth in specific areas of Richmond, San Pablo, Concord, Pittsburgh, Antioch, and Oakley are assumed. Moderate to high household growth generally fall in the more transit-oriented areas like Walnut Creek and Concord and Pittsburgh, with the extension of the E-BART. And then the Concord Community Reuse Project for the Naval Weapons Station will also be coming online within that time period. So, major employment centers are still generally in Walnut Creek, San Ramon, Pleasant Hill, so similarly still located near some of the BART lines and some of the major freeway access points. I think those were designations we took from the model itself. I'm not sure. I don't think it has one on here, but I can double check. Yeah, with the model. Nope, it's something we can note, and none of this is stuff that can't be changed. So. But so higher density areas show opportunity areas for potential pedestrian improvements where the likelihood of walking and biking is often greater and more closely linked to transit, so which could be in similar areas such as Richmond.
Let me point out that the center designation is related, it looks like to me, to density of jobs. And the density of jobs, say, around the Walnut Creek BART station is much higher than the density of jobs of anywhere in West County. There are a lot of jobs in West County, but they tend to be more spread out and less concentrated. And because they're less concentrated, the opportunities for focusing your money on improvements for pedestrians are going to be spread out too. I mean, look at where the, what is the name of that? What is it, FedEx or UPS that has the distribution center out? It's UPS. It's got some jobs there, and it's certainly got a lot of activity, but it's not really a great concentration of jobs that you could build a pedestrian center around.
Did you also leave out, because they're too small, some of the jurisdictions with fewer people, like El Sobrante and Kensington, that sort of thing? Yeah.
There are a lot of smaller centers like that throughout the county.
Aren't in the, yeah, that's okay. They're not doing anything on bikes up there in Kensington. And they've got some dangerous streets.
Well, and similarly to Brad's point, how we adapt this and use this going forward, we can add some different characteristics for some of those too. So maybe they're less directly derived from the model and are more qualitative. So the next part we took a look at is trying to take a glance at equity across the county. So we looked at disadvantaged communities. So this is data provided by the CalEnviroscreen database, which is from the California EPA, or Cal EPA. It's a service that they provide that's easily downloadable, and you can put it out into TAZs and create maps like this. So what we've done is Cal EPA lists that if you're in the top 25 most disadvantaged communities, then you qualify, or in the severity of their scoring criteria, then you qualify as a disadvantaged community for the state. So what we've shown on here is where that area is 75% or greater, so where it meets that disadvantaged communities criteria, and then also shown where the next level down from that is likely to be. So for the most part, residents of these areas are more reliant on transit and walking to transit, and therefore may overlap a lot with some of the higher density areas, except for in like downtown Walnut Creek. So part of this is what you'll notice is a lot of it is in Richmond, San Pablo, some in Hercules and Pinole, and then as you go over to Martinez and some of the northern parts of Concord. So some of the northern parts of Concord may shift as the newer developments for the Naval Weapons Station comes online, and what happens with that, and then Pittsburgh as well, and parts of Oakley and Antioch.
I saw you used CalEnviroscreen, which is great. Did you also know that EPA has an EJ View, at least so far, program, so you kind of, you might want to just quickly match it against that and see how they, yeah.
Then we took a look at a lot of the regional context in terms of mode split. So kind of the total what's happening in the county, and then also taking a look at what's happening in each RTPC, as each RTPC has a different characteristic in their travel patterns. So note that these are all day numbers and not peak hours, as we normally look at in terms of travel demand, but these are from the California Household Travel Survey, and that's the way they provide the data. So looking at all of these numbers means that walk shares could go up a little bit, especially due to carpooling, and then that there's more shopping, school, and social trips than normally would occur during the commute hours. As you can see, Central County has the largest drive alone. Carpooling is most prevalent in East County, as they often have to travel probably the furthest to job centers. And then walking in West County, it could just be looking at the density of development. Transit is relatively stable, but higher in West and Central, and then biking is generally equal across the board. Yeah.
I always get kind of confused when I see these charts of mode split, because it seems like there are a lot of people that rely on multiple modes of transportation, and I always wonder how this kind of data captures that. Like if you walk to BART, for example. So predominant, it's whichever length of trip is the greatest. You only count that, but not.
So what you can do from the California Household Travel Survey that I don't think you can do from the census is actually analyze the linked trips. So did you walk to transit, but transit was your major mode to get to work or something like that? So kind of the first mile, last mile type question as well. So you can get to that level with the California Household Travel Survey data, but yes, your assumption is correct that with this data, it takes the longest, I think it's the longest length of trip and makes that your defaults to your primary trip purpose in this table. So.
Hey, Patrick, I got a quick question. Noticing here, I'm looking in the document here, the same table as that, and I noticed the numbers are a little bit different. And also, you also noted it with the transportation plans when you had for each of the jurisdictions. Has this been updated? I mean, has your presentation been updated since the document was released? Just making sure here, because there's some discrepancies in the numbers. It's on page 20 of the document. So I noticed a difference in the SWAT and WICTAC there. Oh, see, You know what? Maybe I'm wrong here. You know what? I'm looking at it more. You know what? You probably just move the.
They were shifted around.
Yeah, it's more than shifting the column, or you just. Yeah.
The authority has a particular order that we like to go into, which is west, central, east, southwest.
Okay.
We try to do it all the time.
All right, that's, my apologies. I realize there's a difference.
Making sure you read it.
Yeah, so,
We're keeping you on your toes.
okay, thanks.
As a follow-on to Greg's comment, we are very interested as the Bicycle Advisory Committee in splitting up the mode share. And we don't care about how far they went on their longest part. We care if they used a bicycle in any part. So please do that research.
That's something we can note and take a look at. Yeah, we took a look. I don't think it's quite in here, but within the actual report is looking at trips under a mile, trips within a mile and 3 miles, and trips within 3 miles and greater. So kind of also taking a look at what's happening there and potential opportunities for increases in those. But that could be a way we can add the linked trip information too. So what percentage of those trips may have had a walk or bike trip associated with them as well. And more columns. And the next part is what we took a look at on the regional context was areas of high pedestrian collisions. So using the Switters data and the TIMS database to create heat maps for the county. We thought since it's a very large county, showing individual dots would be a little harder to see, but this way they kind of align on the corridors and high collision areas that we would like to focus on. So we mapped the frequency of these collisions to get a sense from those from 2009 to 2013. So those are the complete data set years. And then 14, 15, I think, are almost done being updated. So collision patterns are relatively similar for collisions that involved pedestrians and cyclists, with high collision concentrations of collisions occurring along many major arterials and in more densely populated areas, such as Richmond and San Pablo, downtown Walnut Creek, Pleasant Hill, Concord, and Antioch. Roadways that experience the highest number of collisions, so in the actual report we have the highest number of pedestrian collision corridors and highest number of bicycle collision corridors as well. So for pedestrians, that looked at Clayton Road, San Pablo Avenue, Willow Path Road, Monument Boulevard, and then Lone Tree Way in Antioch Brentwood. So there were a higher number of pedestrian collisions than bicycle collisions. And then similarly, we did the same type of analysis for the regional bikeway collisions. So the roadways that experienced the largest number of cyclist-involved collisions were similarly Clayton Road, San Pablo Avenue, Willow Path Road, Monument, and then Contra Costa Boulevard in Concord Pleasant Hill. So a little bit different, but similarly a lot of the highly used corridors.
If I could, Willow Pass Road is a long street. It goes from Pleasant Hill through Concord, over Willow Pass the hill, through unincorporated Bay Point and Pittsburgh. And it would be interesting to see those numbers split out also, since there are so many communities involved, and since they're divided by a row of hills.
We can potentially take a look at that.
There are a lot of roads that are very long. San Pablo Avenue, Contra Costa Boulevard, also very large, multi-jurisdiction, multi-region. So it's, in some sense, it's not surprising that those roads show up because they're so long. And that's the Monument, though, if you look at the length, if you were to divide the number of collisions by the length of the road, Monument would probably pop up as the number one. I mean, it's already, for bicyclists, it's right there at the very top.
Yeah, and this kind of shows what I was just mentioning in a little more tabular of a format, so you can compare cyclist collisions and bicycle collisions as well.
While we're on the subject, as far as the figure in the report, it'd be helpful if it was a full page figure. The heat maps, if we can make those full page.
Okay. So we can just lay it out differently in the PDF. Yeah, because they came, at least in my version, full page. So
Oh,
it
good.
would just be a printing setting issue that we can fix.
A follow-on to Paul's comment, if the information on any page in this report is available on the computer, either yours or CCTA's, how about on that very page put the exact link? Because then we can explode it out as big as we want and look at individual block-long segments.
You mean a link to the image?
A link to the image.
Yeah, the whole thing is slated to go on the keepcontracostamoving.net after we finish approving it. So that way you'll be able to zoom in to each individual graphic as well in a PDF version.
Yeah, but I want the exact link of the individual page that's in the report, so I don't have to read the whole report and search around over again on the website. I can just go straight to it.
It should be a linked document. So in the beginning table of contents, they all should be linked. So you should just be able to go to the list of figures and click on which figure you want, and it should take you to that. So that should already be built into the PDF. You look skeptical.
Yeah, well, I'll say it again. On the individual page in the report, I want to see a link all spelled out with 40 different numbers and letters on it, so I don't have to poke around on the website to find the particular page I'm interested in. I just type that link into the search engine, and boom, it shows up.
Actually, Bruce, just want to mention, you want a link to an actual image, like a JPEG or something? Is that what you're looking for?
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking about. I mean, this is the 21st century. We use computers. Paper is very rare stuff, so I want to be able to go from the paper straight to the computer without having to search around on the computer a long time. Is that unreasonable?
It's not necessarily unreasonable, but it's just a little more complicated on how you do that and where you host those. So that's a broad question of how that is done on the CCTA side.
You don't think that going to the table of contents and finding the link on the table of contents and clicking on it and having it take you directly to that page is insufficient? Is that too I'm not quite sure exactly what you're saying. I mean, how do you type out the name? And
So you're saying on keepcontracostamoving.net, where we'd have a link to the report, also to have links to the figures? So it takes you to just the figure? I'm just making sure I'm understanding.
Okay.
And that same link would be in the report.
I apologize. This is a waste of time. I will shut up. You can continue.
we can talk about it later, too.
Okay, so next we took a look at the Countywide Bicycle Network from the 2009 CBPP. So we've done two kind of assessments of the network. So this is just what's in the previous plan and does not necessarily reflect what has been updated in the network since then. So this is our primary starting point of looking at the Countywide Bicycle Network, or the CBN is the 2009 CBPP, references that. So lots of acronyms. And just where those lines fall on the map. So these are where they were existing and proposed as of 2009, and we will be updating where those are now existing versus proposed for where it will stand when the plan gets adopted next year. And then looking at the across barriers connections. So this is just an example of one. There's a bunch more in here that we can discuss, or that you can take a look at the methodology in the report. Kind of gives an overview of mainly where freeway and overcrossings or undercrossings need improvements. So where they have one bike lane or a bike lane on both sides, or wide enough shoulders, or they have sidewalks on one side or both sides. And then where they do not have all of those, they're deemed to be incomplete per the methodology. Similarly, it looked at railway crossings and waterway crossings, and then the availability of bike and pedestrian crossings for every 1 mile segment of a freeway. So it's just to say, do you have to go way out of your way to make it to the next crossing or not, and where those locations are. So we've done that across all areas of the county. All the more zoomed in maps are in the report itself. Yeah.
Just to clarify, did that just include freeway and railway crossings?
Freeway, railway, and waterways.
Okay, well, my comment on that is there are some major roads, Moraga Way is an example, where it's very difficult to get across. There's a lack of crosswalks and signalized intersections. So it might be worth looking at some of the major roads as well. I've heard that at least in La Miranda, I've heard that brought up numerous times as a barrier to even using a bus stop, which is on the other side of the street, getting to the bus stop, for example.
Make sure you send us your specific locations, and our hope was that those kind of comments would be on interactive web map that was online. So it's a lengthy process to try to do that for every road throughout the county. So we were hoping that we'd get that feedback from local residents. So if that is looking at a barrier along a regular arterial or a major arterial, that we should know that too, and that those are equally as important. But that just wasn't a part of the methodology for this process. Yes.
As you probably know, protected bikeways are becoming really essential anyway, but we're beginning to see more of them. I can't remember exactly where you list some of them, but you do say that Richmond doesn't have any. FYI, we do have a strange one that I had to have pointed out to me, and it's with plastic bollards. It's along Canal Boulevard, and it goes out to the Red Oak Victory, where almost nobody rides. However, it links up with a wonderful new section of the Bay Trail from Ferry Point. So nice little ride if anybody is interested. But so we have one so far.
That's good to know. So you must be the first then in the county? Must be the first then in Contra Costa.
Yeah, that's the Costa? Really? Oh.
There aren't any others that I know about that have been, there's many that are planned, but none that I think have been built other than that one.
Yeah, El Cerrito was voted to put protected bikeways on San Pablo Avenue, which would be fabulous, but that was about, I don't know what the council meeting was, I went to a year and a half ago or something like that. It's got a long way to go, but you can imagine if you could go from San Pablo, city of San Pablo, to Oakland on a protected bikeway, that'd be absolutely fantastic, but we'll see.
And then I'll just give some key takeaways, and then I'll hand it over to Megan. So some of our key takeaways from the state of walking and biking and the benchmarking was really looking at updating some of the best practice design guidance and putting that into a section that can be adaptable to. So as many of the newer types of design guides are coming out, that we provide some flexibility for jurisdictions to be able to reference the CBPP. The Countywide Bicycle Network, the CBN, connects a lot of communities, but it's not always low-stress connections for all ages and abilities. But the network itself and the desire lines are mostly there from what we've looked at, with some few exceptions. 11 of the jurisdictions lack bicycle and pedestrian plans. Some are already in progress. And then disadvantaged communities are generally located in Richmond, San Pablo, Martinez, Pinole, Hercules, Martinez is in there twice, Pittsburgh, and Oakley. And then most of the walk trips are under 1 mile, so 27% of trips, while bike and walk trips between 1 mile and 3 miles make up about the same percentage of 2% of each trip. So some pretty interesting statistics as we look through those. And then most pedestrian and bicyclist-involved collisions are along a lot of our key major arterials in the region, and that's pretty similar throughout each RTPC. And these are what are also designated as routes on the 2009 CBN network. So with that, I don't know if you wanted to do more questions or if you want me to hand it over to Megan. Yeah, if there's any other feedback on the document itself, and I know there's some things that we've talked about that are kind of missing that could help explain a little bit.
Okay, a mechanical thing, having the same page numbering sequence throughout the entire document would be useful. Some of these pages have 3 different numbering sequences all down in one corner. And then it would be useful to have a page of acronyms, normally the acronym is explained when it's first used, or the 3 or 4 words are said, and then in parentheses the acronym. But if I don't make my list on the side 10 pages later, I don't remember what that acronym is. So as part of the index, a page of acronyms would be very useful.
And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, the page number issue is just because it's in the packet too?
Yeah, well, there's not one numbering system throughout the entire document. Numbering systems stop and restart again. All right. Then also on a mechanical issue where you have your appendices, the appendix name is only said once at the beginning of the appendix, and then there's no more appendix A down in the corner or appendix B in the numbering system either. So it's easy to get mixed up as to which appendix I'm looking around in, because the appendixes are very similar to each other. All right, on page 35, this might be overlapping into Megan's presentation. And if it is, I'll shut up until then. About the 3rd open bullet point down, we're talking about BART stations. The planned e-BART stations in Pittsburgh Center and Antioch, that's good, but we also have a planned e-BART station in Brentwood, and by the time this document is published, these stations in Pittsburgh Center and Antioch are going to be open, so you might want to say that we have opened ones. And then e-BART just means Eastern BART, so we don't have to call it e-BART anymore. The fare collection is seamless to the person using the system, even though the track gauge changes and they have to change cars 40 feet across. It's not a big difference. So one of my pet peeves is quit calling it e-BART. Let's call it BART, because that's what it is. Thanks.
That is something that we're starting.
Yeah,
we're starting to do that as well.
Yeah, Warm Springs also should be on that.
Oh, yeah, Warm
that's
Spring.
If we're
Alameda
making comments on the mechanics of it, I like to say that I am a big fan of white space, and there's lots of white space, and I know it's 156 pages long, but it could be 146 if it condensed, but I think for the reader, it's much nicer. I actually printed out the first some odd pages, and I really like the color scheme. And as much as I think you guys have a great graphic, FP, I'm not sure that needs to be at the top of everything. I think it needs to be at the bottom, because this is really a countywide CCTA document. And I think as an individual, I understand it, but as a layperson out there who's going to be reading it, they'll just keep wondering, well, who's that? Or is that just supposed to be a
What is that
bicycle and a pedestrian path? Or I mean, it's a nice graphic. It's just maybe a little too intensely broadcast on the top.
We can likely have our graphics person kind of use the main logo for the plan and try to recreate that whole bar.
Yeah, but I like all that green and stuff. I think it just should be a bolder CCTA countywide bike plan update December 2017 at the top or something, or just 2017. We don't even, I mean, we know it's 2017 version, but by the time it's done, it's 2018. Whatever. Those are my comments.
Thank you.
On Table 2, regional plans, under the Park District, we have 73 parks now and over 120,000 acres. Just the numerical update.
And, okay, on page 36, which is the following page of 35, but it's also listed as page 4-43, we're talking about across barrier connections, and on the 1, 2, 3, 4th line down, we say something about arterials are severe barriers to walking and biking, blah, blah, blah. And then 2 more lines further down, we talk about crossing waterways, canals, busy roadways. I would like to posit that there's really no difference between an arterial and a busy roadway. And this is a follow-on to what Greg had to say about not being able to cross Moraga Boulevard just to get to the bus stop on the other side. Thank you.
Any other comments, questions?
Yeah, I do have one, actually. I think the data and research, I would just like to commend the team for the detail provided. But with regard to the collision data, it appears that it pretty much based solely on California Highway Patrol SWITR's data. I was wondering if there had been any research on locally collected collision data from some of the police departments, because it may not necessarily be captured by CHP. For example, in Lafayette, at some point in the last 5 to 6 years that I'm aware of, most of the street-level collision have begun to be collected by the police department itself. So we rely on a lot of that information. I'm happy to share if it would be useful and fit with the methodology intended. Otherwise, it could be anomalous if only one jurisdiction is supplying that type of data.
Yeah, we weren't scoped to do it that individually, just because it's harder to do that for across each jurisdiction. That being said, I'm not sure if the data meshes or not, and if we would be overlapping some of the data. I don't know if they do collect it locally, do they also submit it to the SWITR's database? Is that also in the SWITR's database?
It's something, I'd be happy to confer as far as checking for redundancies, but I guess the larger point of my concern is whether there's underrepresentation of the data in the document, but I understand if there are limitations within the methodology.
Do you know if it's a geolocated data? That's often
I would have to
part of this
confirm.
analysis is the SWITR's, and the TIMS database will give it to us in a GIS type of format, so we can then create the maps relatively easily. Megan probably knows.
I was just going to say, we usually end up using locally collected data for like the most recent year or something like that, because there's such a delay in getting into SWITR's, and TIMS does all the cleaning to make sure that it's correctly geolocated. So that's usually, in my experience, when we're trying to get like the locally reported, it's because you're trying to get like 2017 data that's not yet in SWITR's, but not necessarily because there's a discrepancy, unless there is some kind of systematic database that you all have that doesn't also get reported up into SWITR's.
Yeah, it's something that I'm happy to follow up on. It's just more of a question of whether that particular collision data that's being represented in this regional plan is capturing as much as we think it is.
So I think the main thing that it doesn't capture is that there's a huge underreporting in general, right? So we think it's as much as like 25% of collisions that happen, in particular ones that don't involve injuries, just never get reported at all. And where we've typically been trying to kind of pick up that piece of it is doing some of the surveys where we are asking people to report areas that they feel unsafe, and trying to make sure that we're kind of overlaying that with the collision data that has been reported, so that you're not missing kind of some of the places people might be avoiding altogether because they feel unsafe, or that might have some safety issues that just aren't showing up in SWITR's.
Good segue.
Yeah, right. It was like a segue.
All right, if any other questions,
Yeah,
comments?
more questions. On Table 1A, Assessment of Freeway Roadway Crossings, it's on page 4-71. On the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, on the 6th vertical column, we have an I/C, or maybe that's a lowercase l/C. What does that stand for, please?
Incomplete or complete.
Incomplete or complete. Okay, so you got a capital Y and a capital N, and then a small n and a small y. How do those figure in there?
Yes or no, within the parentheses.
Yeah, and it was just a data entry thing, whether it was capitalized or not capitalized?
Correct.
Okay. And then over on the far right vertical column, we have PBOC. What does that stand for, please? Yes or no?
Pedestrian bicycle overcrossing.
Okay. Yeah, those questions would have been answered on my acronym page. Okay, thank you. Now, on the previous page, ABC Analysis Task 2, page 3, but it's also page 4-70, and it's done by spokemore.com. Okay, and this is about the very top paragraph, results/analysis, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 lines down, we're talking about a measure of latent demand for the crossing. I would like to posit that we have to assume there's latent demand for every single freeway crossing in our county, because we don't count the people swimming across the river when we try to decide if we need a bridge over that river. That's supposed to be a little funny. I don't see anybody smiling. There's demand there, but if we don't see anybody using it, then we can't count it as demand. The swimmers, only their head is sticking out of the water. Only the top couple percent of brave cyclists are crossing many of these freeways.
Yeah, I think that was just their general qualitative assessment of land uses on either side of a crossing.
Okay, and a final comment on the analysis here. We're talking about routes of regional importance for cars. There are also routes of regional importance for bicyclists. That assumption is never made in this document anywhere. I rode my bicycle today from Pittsburgh to here. I followed a route of regional importance for motorists, and I was on the freeway, an eight-lane wide freeway, because there was no alternative. I get stopped about once a year by the highway patrol who say, "You don't belong out here." I have to agree with them, but it's the only alternative, and I'm in fact legal out there. About 3 times a year I get breezed by the motorists who think, "This is our country, you don't belong out here. We're going to show you you don't belong out here." Breeze, technical term, intentional close pass. Okay, thank you.
Okay. Bill?
Yeah, I'm not quite sure why we even need to measure latent demand. Every bicycle has a demand, latent demand, to cross freeway on-ramps and off-ramps safely. I don't know of one that's safer without some kind of crossing or warning or something like that. We have them in our town. We've been trying to deal with them. I think from the point of view of the bicycle community, it's 100% latent demand.
Just piggybacking a bit, I'm not sure what the law is, because I'm seeing more people riding on 80, which freaks me out as a driver on 80. But does it say that if you don't have a reasonable alternative? And I've even seen people walking on 80. And like down by San Pablo Dam Road, somewhere around Hilltop, which is a really difficult, as a bicyclist, going from Pinole to El Cerrito is very ziggy. Then I think people are walking it more on the freeway.
Caltrans has warrants as to whether they allow bicyclists and or pedestrians on the freeway. And about 25% of all the system miles in California's freeways allow bicyclists.
Hence, I've never seen anyone getting a ticket for it, but it's brave.
Yeah, brave. I have to agree.
Or crazy, or both.
Or both. If I could draw your attention to page 5-1, which is the memorandum from the Transportation Authority dated December 6th.
This is the next item?
Oh, this is the next item? Okay, we can move on to the next item then. Thank you.
Yeah, I'd like to move on. Meg, if you have a presentation, please.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Patrick.
So this kind of serves as the segue between existing conditions and where we're going in terms of some of the significant updates that we're thinking about doing with this refreshed plan. And a lot of this has just been the listening and learning through the wide variety of different public outreach things that we've been doing since we started the plan update. So that's included a website survey that's been up ever since we first launched the website. as well as pop-up events at, this is kind of a taking the meeting to where people already are style, as opposed to assuming that they'll necessarily come to the library on a Tuesday night, kind of a more conventional meeting. The online town hall that we did just a few weeks ago, and then of course the tour of the RTPCs that we did after we released the white paper, and the survey that we had as an opportunity to make sure that we were getting feedback from you all on the bold ideas that were included in the white paper. So the website survey has really been about trying to get some of that more qualitative data to make sure that we understand kind of where some of the focus areas need to be. And it was both supposed to be kind of a positive and negative tone, or kind of an issues and opportunities piece of it. So what do you really like already? What's working really great for you? Where do you currently walk and bike? And then, of course, where are the needs and the issues as well. We had 360 people fill out that survey online. Most of the respondents said that they walk or bike for at least one trip once a week. And usually those trips are for exercise, recreation, or for shoppings and errands. And that is something, as we're doing, this current generation of pedestrian and bicycle planning, the real focus on those non-commute trips does seem to be one of the primary thoughts for that interested but concerned group, right? That 60% of the population that we're really thinking if we can get some lower stress facilities out there, and start with the recreation, start with the shopping trips, start with those 2 to 5 mile shorter trips. That doesn't certainly preclude the idea of continuing that on into being a commute trip orientation. But for, I think, that group in particular, that focus on those short trips and those kind of more optional trips is a good kind of low-hanging fruit. The common barriers that we heard for why people are not currently walking and biking when they're choosing other modes is missing sidewalks, missing crosswalks, and a few opportunities for separation for bicyclists. When they have long trips, it's harder for them to choose walking and biking when they're on facilities that have very high traffic volumes and have unsafe driving behavior. So some of the suggestions that were frequently heard on the website survey would be to address those concerns that they brought up, so improving the pedestrian facilities, a lot of support for separate bicycle trails or cycle tracks, separated on-street bikeways, improving bikeway connectivity to key destinations, increasing the number of nearby destinations. A lot of that's kind of the land use side of things to make it such that things are within walkable and bikeable distance. Adding bicycle parking at the destinations, focusing on better driving behavior around pedestrians and bicyclists, and reducing traffic speeds. And you can see up here, this is a word cloud that focuses on some of those key themes that we heard. So the pop-up events, as I mentioned, these were opportunities for us to try to figure out where people kind of are already congregating, already clustered at events throughout the county, and then taking our booth to them and giving an opportunity to do the interactive web map and the survey in kind of more in-person format, and then also advertising the availability of those online tools so that people, if they didn't have time to stop and talk to us for a longer period of time, would be aware of that and go ahead and fill in. And I think that that's certainly part of the reason that we were able to get 360 surveys. So we went to the Brentwood Farmers Market, the Concord Music and Market, the Danville Farmers Market, the Martinez Amtrak Station, the Orinda Summer Concert, Pinole Farmers Market, Pittsburgh Off the Grid, the Richmond BART Station, and had an Energizer Station for Bike to Work Day in Walnut Creek. So some of the key themes that we heard during the in-person pop-up events that we attended was the need to maintain and improve the existing pedestrian and bicycle facilities, and especially the crossings. That's certainly something that we hear a lot, that the trails are great. I really enjoy the trails, but don't just assume because there's a trail that it's necessarily comfortable if there's either missing crossings or really uncomfortable crossings at some of those major arterials. Adding new pedestrian and bicycle facilities to close gaps, in particular east-west connectivity. Here we see the education for rules on the road, and this time kind of focusing on all road users, and then a particular interest in safe routes to school and safe routes to transit for priorities. So a lot of that occurred kind of earlier in the plan development process when we were really in that kind of listening mode. Once we got around to kind of mid to late summer, that was when we were writing the white paper, right? So that was the last time that we were here to talk with you all, was when we had put together these bold ideas, the kind of the various ways that we could really try to shake up the plan and to think about potentially new or different content for the 2018 plan. So the online town hall came in late October when we had that white paper released, and we're really wanting to get some feedback on some of those kind of key innovations and bigger ideas. So people had a chance during the town hall itself, and then we had an online survey. We put a recording of the town hall up. There were polling questions during the town hall, so people who did not attend the town hall live could watch the recording and then do all the polling through a survey that was online. So the key concerns that were mentioned during that, either the polling or the feedback that came afterwards, were challenging intersections and crosswalks, missing sidewalks, lack of barrier, again, that kind of interest in a separation for bikes, and then traffic speeds. And the suggestions were to really focus on improving pedestrian crossings and filling in the sidewalk gaps to protect those bike facilities, and we saw the east-west connectivity coming up again in the online town hall. So we've been talking about the white paper. We decided after we made our rounds to the various RTPC meetings that what would be most helpful would be for us to put together a survey to really consolidate the feedback and make sure that we had a good consensus on the variety of the different topics that were presented in the white paper, which ones were really resonating as being those that you wanted us to focus on the most, and which ones might be of interest but a little bit lower priority. And so we had 13 different completions of the survey. And if you'll recall back to the way the white paper was organized, there were kind of different topical areas, and then the bold ideas were consolidated under those. So the priorities under each of these different topic areas on the collaborate side, creating a regional backbone bikeway network and conducting complete street corridor studies, or calling for them. Under the prioritizing, identifying short and long-term project opportunities and focusing on VMT reduction and SB 743. And of course, we're getting even more clarity on what SB 743 is looking like with some recent finalizing of the rulings on that. In terms of the innovate category, a lot of support for innovative funding strategies, making sure we have best practice design guidance, and creating a pedestrian crossing toolkit. And then some others that came up, making sure that equity is being considered in funding decisions, specific guidelines for those Class 4 separated bikeways, and then looking at pedestrian and bicyclists at interchanges and some guidance for accommodating peds and bikes through those tricky barriers. Of note is also kind of what came in on the lower priority side. So curbside management, which was kind of thinking about Uber and Lyft and loading and autonomous vehicles, was certainly something of interest, but I think in the near term seen as being a lower priority. Innovative engagement, some of the anecdotal feedback we heard on that was that that's something that's kind of maybe more appropriately thought of through the local plans and the local effort than necessarily something that happens at the countywide regional scale, as well as bike parking guidelines is something that is a bit more kind of locally oriented. So also on our website throughout the entire project development process has been an interactive map. So this was an opportunity for people to go in and be a little bit more location specific in their feedback, chances for them to give us areas that they really enjoy walking and biking, and then areas that they really are hoping that the plan can focus on. So there was a chance for people to weigh in on where bicycle parking is needed. And I'm imagining that we will turn this into lists or more zoomed in maps that can either be done by the RTPC scale or down to the local jurisdiction scale with just a resource for where we heard this feedback. We also had a lot of feedback on where people enjoy riding, and I think something that's going to be really telling here is the ability to try to replicate these feelings and these what is it about these locations. And certainly this map looks quite a bit different than a lot of the other maps we've been looking at today in terms of not being focused on those arterials. So I'm sure the kind of more lower speed local streets and trails, that's really resonating with this idea of the backbone network that we're also hearing is something that has a lot of support.
I actually have a question here from Bill.
Yeah. Have you broken down the bike parking into areas that would be fine with a metal bike park, a metal structure, and the areas that most need electronic bike lockers, which of course we'd love to see everywhere, including over here where I noticed that they're full all the time. That might be useful to look at, see where they're necessary and where they need to be added onto.
We can add that in as kind of one of our takeaways for interpreting this, as whether they tend to be focused around kind of hubs and areas that might be kind of higher scale, higher density bike parking versus the one-offs. That's a good comment.
Could I follow on to that?
Sure.
It seems to me that it's much more important to not get killed while you're riding your bike to somewhere than it is to have a nice place to park your bike once you get there. This is a bad attitude on my part. Sorry.
I think that the question is that the mode shift and the new people that we're trying to get on their bikes. And certainly I hear a lot when I ask people, why do they not ride? Absolutely, I don't feel safe on the streets itself is one of them. But if there's, in particular, a really high incident of a bicycle theft, that can frequently be a reason why people will choose not to ride as well. So we can, if we don't do them both, if we don't both provide the safer facilities and that kind of secure place for you to be able to store your bike, you could potentially be counterproductive in one way or the other. So I do think they're pretty important complementary, especially in locations where people are concerned about theft.
As someone who's had his bicycle stolen from a BART station, I can assure you that safe, secure bike parking is very important. And it's one of the reasons I don't bike to the Safeway, because they do not have a good bike place to park my bike.
I've had my bike stolen too.
And then this is where do you enjoy walking? And again, these seem to be very clustered through the downtowns and kind of those priority development areas, those kind of memorable retail nodes, as well as some recreational areas as well. Okay. Next is places to improve bicycle crossings. And I think that this type of feedback is where we're really interested in pairing the across barriers connections and the collision maps and this kind of more anecdotal feedback to make sure that we have a more complete data set picture of where some of the key challenges are. This will be overlaid when we start thinking about that bicycle network, the backbone bicycle network, to make sure that if there is a key crossing challenge that bicycle network is going to be going through, that's called out and that's part of the definition of that project. These are key corridors where bicycle facilities are needed to fill gaps. And again, this is going to be helping us as we think about reframing and redefining that countywide bicycle network to be addressing as many of these as possible. Some of the ones we see are San Pablo Avenue, San Pablo Dam Road, Central Avenue and El Cerrito and Richmond, Willow Pass and Clayton Road, around the Pleasant Hill BART, Ignacio Valley Road, Walnut Creek to Pleasant Hill BART, downtown Pleasant Hill and Concord, and Pittsburgh to Central County, and Orinda to El Sobrante. On the pedestrian side, these are some of those key barriers. I think this will be, as we were talking about earlier, that the arterial side of thing, and that's, this certainly, and it looks like it does here, address many of the interchange crossings, but also some of those wider, trickier arterials. And so being able to combine these with that more objective, is there a crossing every quarter mile measure that we're using for the ABCs, I think will give us a more complete picture. And then here are some of the key gaps in sidewalks that were mentioned. All right. So that's it for the overview, and I mean, we've hopefully tried to do a pretty wide variety of different types of public outreach opportunities through this plan, with chances for people to participate in person as well as electronically and virtually. So any feedback or questions on the overview of the public outreach?
Go ahead.
Actually, James, and then Bruce.
As we were talking before in the other document, mechanically speaking, I think it might be helpful to label the data sheets after the memo itself, that summarizes the results. The data sheets, the only way that I can discern that, for example, the first 19 pages of data are from the online survey are just the sheer number of respondents, but it doesn't necessarily indicate that that's from the online survey as opposed to the qualitative comments and or the inventory of zip codes that corresponds to perhaps the town hall or the online survey. I mean, just knowing what's behind this document, I can tell, but to the average person, perhaps not.
All right, Bruce and then Bill.
All right, thank you. With, what was it, 379 comments at surveys at the beginning?
I think it was, yeah.
Something like that, and then another 13 people got surveyed with the second survey. So let's call that roughly 400 responses, and the population of Contra Costa County is in the vicinity of 1.1 million. So we don't have enough numbers here yet to do anything statistically significant, right? I'm sure you understand that. How are we going to make our plan statistically significant?
We don't have enough money to do something like that. It would require spending as much money on a statistically significant survey to do that. I mean,
I think we should spend that kind of money. I think we'd rather put in bike lockers and real bike paths and stuff like that. I'm just going to say that.
Doing the surveys is very expensive, and we tried to get good feedback from people interested in the issue in a number of different ways. We've got a lot more feedback already for this plan than for the 2009 plan. And I think we've done some pretty innovative things to try to get that feedback. I mean, you have to assume that these people have got an interest and a certain kind of bias. But, you know, that's a lot of people, 360-some people just for the one survey. That's, I think, good input, even though it's not statistically significant.
Bill?
Did you, Bike East Bay has a number of what they call local working groups. There's a Bike Walnut Creek, there's the Richmond Pedestrian Bicycle Advisory Committee, Berkeley has Bike Friendly Berkeley, etc. Did you solicit any input from these groups or visit their meeting or anything like that?
No, we haven't directly done that, but we have shared the online survey and shared the online town hall with a wide group, including some of those groups.
And some of the cities in West County, I know, put it on their website. So, I mean, I'm not thinking that, in all fairness, only because I'm biased, about how anytime we do a study or plan, getting public input is really hard. And it's truly not representative. But at the same time, it validates what we already know. And that, I think, helps. So I don't think it's statistically accurate. And you being much more knowledgeable as a writer helps those of us who aren't necessarily as savvy or knowledgeable about that. But I would never want to make this an activity where we would try to get statistically significant. I mean, we have always had a limited amount of input. And yet we still go forward with plan after plan after plan. And I think they're still pretty accurate.
I think we tried particularly hard on this one to make sure that we were reaching a broader variety, hopefully, of the community. So that was why the pop-ups and going out to places where people already are, as opposed to hoping that people would self-select to go to community meetings on this, was a pretty deliberate attempt, hopefully, to make sure that it was a good cross-section. On the Bike East Bay working groups, I do think, you know, the next phase of this, when we're getting into the bike network and doing that updated draft of the backbone network, That one in particular is one that I think we're going to want to make sure gets circulated. There's going to be a chance to do another kind of online map to weigh in with feedback on that. So a lot of that is us trying to overlay all these different data layers and hear all the different feedback and look at what all the different plans are. But there's a real efficiency and value added to people who kind of are in the thick of this and doing it and have that local expertise of those specific roads. And so we want to make sure that we are able to get all of that kind of collective brain power to review the network once it's out there in draft.
Bruce?
Yeah, in the first survey, the 379, there was one question on there toward the end that said, do you want to give us additional feedback? And there were 75 or 80 people that either said sure or gave a couple of sentences more. Did you seek those people out to give additional input on your 13-person survey?
So I think the 13-person survey was the RTPCs, right? So that was kind of the follow-up to when we went to the working group, to the tax. So that was a different audience. So it wasn't like an additional 13 people looked at it. There was a survey that was done for the white paper that we sent out just to the RTPC tax. But I don't know about the question, has there been any follow-up with people who wanted to give additional input? Or
I think the people who provided their email got asked, but I don't think there was a specific people went in there and took out their email for those.
Okay.
I think the assumption was that they were going to write their comments in there.
Okay.
Okay, so a follow-on to that, it appears to me that we're weighting the RTPC's TAC responses similar to the bicyclists' responses, and yet, pardon my French, but those guys are a bunch of traffic engineers. They're not bicyclists.
Well, there were two different surveys.
Two different sets of questions.
So one was kind of this kind of citizen survey of how are things working, where do you need us to focus? And then one was, here are these bold ideas for ways that we might be thinking about planning and funding pedestrian and bicycle projects. What seems to be, where you'd like to be prioritizing that from a regional level versus doing something at the local level. Any other questions?
All right. Actually, I do have one last question. Actually, it's for you and Patrick, just from the last item with that the state of biking and walking in the county. If we have any additional comments, if any of the CVPAC have additional comments, do we just email?
Yeah, I think we just can send them to Brad and
Send them to me, and I will send them on to Patrick and Megan.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, if we have no other questions or comments, I guess we'll move on to the next item, which I think is actually lunch. So we'll adjourn, and I guess I don't know when.
However, I'm
Best bicycle network and priority pedestrian areas. Meg?
It is
I did it. Yeah.
It is on now.
All right.
Cooking with gas.
Perfect. Great, thank you for pointing that out. Okay, so what I was saying is that the 2009 plan had a countywide bicycle network defined, and this is supposed to be that kind of analogous routes of regional significance for vehicles for bikes, right? So this idea that these are the primary connection points to the primary destinations around the county. And I think one of the major things that both the outreach has identified as well as the best practices as we're thinking about doing planning for all ages and abilities and that 8-year-old to 80-year-old cyclist is that there's some real limitations to what the 2009 CBN included. So there's certainly a lot of major crossing barriers of freeways that are there. A lot of the CBN defined routes are on arterials, and so while they may be defined and labeled as a bicycle route, the ability for those facilities to actually accommodate the wide range of bicyclists in the county is very limited. We also heard that access to transit is critical, and now we have some new destinations, some new BART stations, and so just making sure that the new CBN reflects all of those major destinations. And then again, the focus in making sure that we have the trail connections and those east-west connections that seem to be missing, at least from the portion of the CBN that's been built. So what we're proposing to do is to spend quite a bit of our energy and time on the next phase of the plan update on refreshing the CBN. And the ways that we have, the things that we're thinking right now that we're going to be doing for that and that we really want to get your input on is to be starting with that 2009 plan, assuming that there was obviously a lot of thought put into what those destinations are and what those desire lines are, but that not necessarily those specific routes are the right routes. And so making sure that we're doing an assessment of all of the routes that are defined in there for whether or not they're low stress. So ideally, the routes are going to be comprised of trails, of cycle tracks, of bike boulevards, and of bike lanes on low volume, low speed roads. So that would be kind of what's called a level of traffic stress 1 or 2. So the 8-year-old to the 80-year-old would feel comfortable riding on it. So doing an assessment of which portion of the 2009 network kind of falls into that criteria. And for the areas that don't fall into that, what can we replace them with? So are there any projects that have been completed since then that we need to update? Are there any things that are in the local jurisdictions pipeline of plans that we can be making sure to reflect? Have there been applications for recent grant funding that we know are kind of ideas that are out there to try to get as much as we can of just a consolidation of the big ideas that have already been floated? And then I think that there's just going to have to be some additional filling in the gaps. So key desire lines, key corridors that need to be connected by bike, but that right now just drawing a line on Ignacio Valley and calling that a bike route isn't really making it such that it's a low stress. And I think that's really where these complete street corridor studies are going to fill in that piece of it, that there'll be areas that we know this corridor needs to be defined. And I think the Olympic corridor is probably a really good example of one that's already been done, to the extent that it didn't say that the solution needs to be on Olympic itself, but that's a key desire line to connect Lafayette-Moraga Trail down to Iron Horse Trail. What is the various different options that could connect those? And I understand Willow Pass is one that just got some SB1 funding for a similar complete street corridor study. So I'm expecting that we may have several more of those types of corridors that this plan may call out, that it hasn't yet been determined what the right facility is, but we know that just kind of saying, go ahead and use Ignacio that as a bike route as is probably also not going to be that. So I'd really like to open it up to your thoughts on the best way that we can start approaching this kind of identification and consolidation of the low stress facilities as we compile an updated CBN for the county. Good places to start, good resources, good ways for us just to be aware of the thought that's already been put in from the local jurisdictions on what some of these key opportunities might be.
Bruce?
One thing that we could do would be to encourage East Bay Regional Park District to connect its various trails. I'm thinking particularly of the Delta de Anza Trail to the Iron Horse Trail, which has a missing segment through the Concord Naval Weapons Station right now, which causes the bicyclist to be allowed to go on the freeway. And another point to connect would be the Contra Costa Canal Trail, where it ends at Muir Road, over to the Iron Horse Trail. On the north central end of the county, this would do wonders to getting across freeway segments that right now are serious barriers to connection. But that puts the impetus from the CCTA onto the East Bay Regional Parks. And although I did read the East Bay Regional Parks 2013 master plan, it doesn't say specifically we want to connect our trails, but it does say specifically we want to encourage other people to connect our trails.
It's a smart document. So kind of really focusing on to what extent this backbone can be trail oriented, or kind of have the foundational elements of it be trails, and then a lot more kind of feeder and extensions where those trails aren't possible. That makes sense.
James?
Just a question about the second bullet on the approach. Is this to be interpreted as facilities or only low-stress facilities would be prioritized in the plan? Because I guess the second part of what I'm leading into is, would it not be beneficial to identify the high-stress areas that could benefit from, or that could be qualified for funding to have low-stress facilities, so to speak? I'm just trying to make sure I'm reading the semantic correctly.
Right. I think what we're envisioning, and this is something that my interpretation of all the feedback we've been getting through all these different public outreach efforts and conversations with you all, is this idea of having a low stress, all ages and abilities backbone as kind of the re-envisioned countywide bike network is something that we want to be prioritizing for this update. And so I think that it's, in some ways, there's a lot of those that are already in place, a lot of the trails that we've been talking about, so highlighting the existing, but then the proposed would be only facilities that are also low stress, as opposed to right now in the CBN, there's lots of facilities that are on there existing or proposed that are not low stress facilities. So a project then that would be a candidate for kind of an implementation of that could be a conversion of a high stress facility into a low stress facility. In some cases, I think those are projects that are already defined, right? There's a lot of the bike plans around the county have those types of projects in them. And in some cases, those are projects that need to be defined. And I think that the process for defining those projects when they're not currently defined would probably be a lot of complete street corridor studies.
So to clarify, this statement here is the desired outcome, not necessarily that the identification process only involves low-stress facilities as they exist now.
The envisioned, and I think what that means in some cases, it's almost going to have to be a pretty thick highlighted corridor rather than a thin highlighted route for the ones that are the complete street corridor studies, that it's kind of like a desire line, origin, destination, that we know these two areas need to be connected, but it's still a bit to be determined by what specific facility. In others, I think it's going to be the ones that are in your local plans that you want to have roll up into this. But that's really what we want feedback on. I think this is probably one of the biggest decision points, and we're not going to need to make it now. There's going to be iterations of it, but we need to give you guys something to react to for a first round of what this looks like. And so just wanting some direction and suggestions on an efficient way to be consolidating and compiling a first cut at that network.
Joanna? And then Bruce.
I was kind of checking in and checking out. But, you know, the PBTF grant cycle again, Brad, when is that, the next one?
We'll probably put it together in 2020. The funding will.
PBTF.
What is it?
Oh, bike ped.
Trail facilities.
Trail facilities, which seems to fund the gap closure, or gap closures seem to be well suited for that money. So it would make.
And TLC as well.
And TLC, yeah. And I think it would be nice to have this work as a map for what future, like not prioritizing, but identifying key areas, gaps that would be well suited for that Measure J money. Does that make sense?
That's a priority.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean,
I think you're saying
Every
you
time
don't
we get-
want it to be hard and fast priority.
Yeah.
But,
anyway, that was just my thought. If that's how what are you calling it, the backbone, the countywide bike network, where you identify things, it's up to the cities then to apply for those funds using that as a strong guide.
And those wouldn't be the only projects that would be eligible for funding, but it certainly would position those projects to compete very well for that funding, to be able to say this is a project that was through a consensus process identified as a critical regional.
Yeah, and maybe we'd want to be geographically broad on those project gaps or something, so it's not just the big low-hanging fruit, but all the areas have something. Just think that every time we do those PBTF grants, NTLC, there's a lot of discussion around what the priorities are, safety and who gets what points and all that stuff. So,
All right, Bruce.
I am 100% in favor of low-stress bike facilities. However, people who ride their bicycles to get somewhere want to get to the somewhere in a fairly direct manner. And if it's a high-stress facility that has at least a little something for the bicyclist, that's way better than a high-stress facility with nothing for the bicyclist. So we've got to have a mix in here. But I would like to say, the older I get, the more I try to ride on trails. However, I'm not going to loop through Danville on my way to Brentwood, starting in Pittsburgh, just to ride on a trail.
So I think it is the question of the definition of the CBN. So I think certainly there's room and importance for kind of having those type of facilities, and I think the design guidance that the plan would include would address kind of the broader variety of facility types. But right now in the definition of the CBN, those types of facilities are included on the CBN, right? So some higher stress facilities are kind of allowed to be in the mix, and so that would be the pretty major shift with this one, would be to kind of say there's room for those facilities, but that's not going to be within the definition of the CBN, something that's in the mix. So we need feedback and direction if that's kind of, if you want to be moving in that shift.
Actually, Meg, yeah, that was going to be my question, comment. Like, I know the emphasis on this backbone network is on a low stress facilities, but I guess if, when feasible, like for these low stress facilities, could you have maybe a parallel higher stress one? Like, just going back to what, piggybacking on Bruce saying, maybe it's more direct, and maybe some cyclists want to use that, even though, because it's more direct in spite of it being more like higher stress.
Yeah, I don't know if we want to have, I don't know the best way to show that on a map. Like, is that something that more kind of we talk about in a narrative, that's, something to still prioritize and make sure that as part of your local jurisdiction planning is to provide kind of for the full range of cyclists that might be using it, or if that's some additional color that's shown on this map, that this is a connected route but not a low stress route. I think it kind of depends on who your audience is going to be of this. I could envision this being kind of something that got handed out to say, okay, if you're trying to get anywhere within Contra Costa and you're, that's with your 8-year-old, this is the route that you would be using. And some of them are going to be right now, and then it would be more kind of the envisioned future of it. I have feedback from you all on what's going to be the most useful for that map.
Okay, Greg, and then Bruce.
To me, there's two very different populations. When you're saying the 8 to 80-year-old, the recreational riders versus, as others have, like Bruce have talked about, getting from one point to another point. And it seems like, one of your maps showed job centers. How are people using a bike as transportation in the greatest concentration to get to work? I'm trying to focus what you're doing in particular areas and how people would use a bike or walk to get to a certain area. And it seems like a lot of what we have is we have lower stress areas that just suddenly dead end in many places and turn into higher stress areas. So where am I going with? I don't know where I'm going with this. I guess I'm trying to focus this more on job centers, population centers, and how people would use a bike to get somewhere. And where are most people trying to get, and focusing on those areas, trying to improve those areas.
Bruce?
getting across barriers is extremely important. Low stress is good. High stress is acceptable. East County, say from the 242 interchange over Willow Pass and then out to Brentwood, in the last 25 years, that freeway has been rebuilt. And just about every crossing has the potential, there's space on it, under it, or on top of it, depending, for there to be space for a bicyclist. Lots of the communities that then had the freeway built through them have narrow, high-speed arterials leading up to this nice, wide, wonderful crossing, and then on the other side, boom, back down to 6 12-foot lanes with no facility for the bicyclist at all, and a nice, narrow sidewalk, which anybody with any brains rides their bikes on, compared to a 45-mile speed limit, which we all know is a 55-mile-an-hour run if there's few other traffic.
So I think what I'm hearing is that there's kind of almost a short-term, medium-term, long-term piece of this, or an implementation piece of this to work out, that if we focus so much on the low-stress backbone, it's potentially at the expense of addressing some of these major barriers at points, that there could be opportunities to take it from a level of stress 4 to a 3, or something like that, to resolve. And so maybe there needs to be a set of projects or a targeted kind of look at addressing key barriers in the short term while we're thinking about kind of a longer term corridor type study too. Would that be one of the ways to think? Okay. Okay. Let's see. I'm actually going to need to hand it off to you if I can. So I'm going to ask Patrick to do kind of a similar discussion on the pedestrians, and then he's also going to take us through the outline of the plan. I have to pick up a phone call, unfortunately.
Through all my notes. We talked about a lot today. Okay, so understanding the existing pedestrian criteria. So similarly to the countywide bicycle network, the previous plan also had criteria of what makes a good pedestrian project in the kind of regional sense. So this included looking at focus areas on pedestrian-oriented districts, or PDAs, transit stops and access, and then routes to other regional destinations and activity centers. So kind of looking forward, there's kind of, we can either, and this is again what we'll want your feedback today, of whether or not we stick with these same criteria or whether or not we add to this criteria. I don't think that we're proposing to remove or change any of the existing criteria. The other comment that we kind of looked at when we looked through this is that there's not really a map for the pedestrian section that says, here are our key first cut screen of pedestrian focus areas. It's kind of up to each jurisdiction to make the case of why it's why it qualifies under that criteria. So some of the ways we can look at adding to that is by kind of taking a look at some of the criteria we have in the State of Walking and Biking report, and kind of saying, should that include disadvantaged communities? Should that be extended to include existing high-density household areas or employment centers? Or should it look at household and employment growth areas, so where the change will occur over the life of the plan potentially? Or whether or not that should also include any areas of high pedestrian collisions. So are there specific corridors or crossings that should be able to be qualified as a priority pedestrian area? So all of this can happen in kind of the two ways of whether or not we just add some of these criteria, or whether or not we use this criteria to say, here's our top 3 or 4 areas and map where those would occur, and kind of say, if your project falls within there, potentially during the funding process, you could get priority or additional points for being in that area. Not to preclude that you couldn't justify other projects that don't fall in there, but that would just be an easier way for jurisdictions to say, from the regional screening, we fall under that criteria.
And I'd like to sort of pull it into a higher level statement, which is we're asking you the question, where are the areas where we need to focus our limited dollars to help pedestrians? Where do you think where we should focus that investment? And are these the right things to be looking at? The disadvantaged communities, the collisions, the higher density employment or households, PDAs, disadvantaged communities?
James?
Okay, thank you. I don't necessarily take issue with the criteria recommended here, but I would, if there's a way to either weave it in or maybe add a new one focusing on school properties and proximity to. Anecdotally, we get a fair amount of feedback at the city regarding concerns for student safety in terms of crossing and walking to and from.
So making safe routes to school a priority.
Yeah.
Hi, Greg?
Yeah, it's, to add to what James is saying, that second bullet, I think, could add school properties. Because to me, if you're within a half mile or a mile of a school or a BART or a major transportation hub or major job center, there shouldn't be any barriers to walking there or taking a short bike ride. And to me, if there is, then that's a problem. It really is. Those shorter trips where people could walk, there shouldn't be barriers to getting to the higher density areas.
Bruce?
Where the pedestrians already are walking and being killed would be a good starting point. And the way we help the pedestrians from being killed is we slow down the traffic. And the way we slow down the traffic is we, among other things, narrow the traffic lanes with bulb outs. But my point is we've got to be careful here because we got to allow the bicyclist to get around this bulb out without forcing the bicyclist out into the traffic lane to be hit by the car whose driver is looking at their cell phone, except occasionally glancing and, driving braille, bumping along the dots.
So how do people feel about existing high-density household employment areas versus growth? Or do we want to look at both as part of this? I think that's probably the biggest question up in the air.
Bruce?
Usually the planning department in the city makes the developer build the sidewalks and the bike lanes and whatever else that they can extract from him. So let's leave future growth on the city to make sure the developer does it.
The only situation that may not be able to happen is in a lot of the infill type of development. So if you have a one unit, but the whole street then doesn't get upgraded, how do we address potentially the whole street in a downtown area?
Make sure the developer, even though the people on both sides of him don't have special facilities, make sure the developer includes the facilities, and then we can say, oh, there's a facility here, maybe we, the city, ought to try to help it out. Because once the housing or the job center has their development agreement or their planning approval, we can't go back and say, oh, we need to make you widen the road after all. That's gone. We lost that opportunity. So that's on the citizens, the community's head. But when we have the opportunity to tell the developer, you add bike lanes in the 100 feet in front of your new building, whether or not there are bike lanes on either side of it, because someday we're going to put bike lanes on either side of it, and we got to start somewhere.
James?
I would advocate including both existing and growth criteria because existing, probably came about as a result of a planning effort and may have more capacity to add density as well. So it's likely that that is going to remain, existing will remain, and therefore, high density will continue to grow in that area too. And then growth is also useful because, there may be brownfield, greenfield that has yet to be realized, and where those occur, especially in an infill setting, you have the potential for higher pedestrian demand anyway. So I think they're both useful for pedestrian planning purposes.
Okay. Anything that shouldn't be on there? I guess I should ask the inverse question just to clarify.
With regard to the disadvantaged communities, those people are already walking, so they can be rolled into the high pedestrian collision corridors.
I would, and as a matter of friendly debate, I would also argue that there are academic studies for disadvantaged communities having a higher rate of, non-pedestrian access that is considered equitable with other communities as well. So I think that's why disadvantaged communities would benefit, not to mention that there are a lot of funding programs that align with that type of criteria.
One more point. Last mile connectivity, which I didn't see on that list, like getting the last even quarter mile to the BART station. When these BART stations were built, they weren't thinking about people walking and biking to them. So fixing up the last mile connectivity, I think, is quite important.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that already falls under the transit stops and access connectivity portion. Or we can say transit / first mile, last mile, if that helps to clarify.
It does build on what Greg said about being a half mile to transit, half mile to school, half mile to job centers.
Just maybe adding some language to the transit stop description. Okay. And our last part, I'll try to be quick about this part. So really looking at, so now we've taken all this information, we've kind of said how we want to look at the networks moving forward, and now the question is how do we want to look at the document itself moving forward. Our hope when we did this project was that we would help simplify and streamline the previous document. It's fairly long and kind of hard to find things within it, and kind of focus on what the objectives and actions are in the implementation phase, and then show and redefine the countywide bikeway network and pedestrian priority areas. And really have those be the peak pinnacle of what's in the body of the plan, not necessarily eliminate things content-wise, but move a lot of it to appendices. So it's all the information will still be there, it's just not necessarily in the body of the plan. So trying to make the body of the plan a little more easy and readable overall to address best practices and the community priorities. So how we kind of want to take a look at doing that and to get your feedback on whether or not this is the right approach. So consolidate and streamline the previous versions with minor updates to existing materials. We want to move supporting analysis to appendices. So similarly, for example, taking what's in the state of walking and biking and maybe making 2 or 3 pages out of it to go in the body as more summary of existing conditions, and then having that still available as one of the key appendices of the document. So you would still be able to reference all of the information that's been done to date. It just makes the upfront document a little easier to read. Our goal is to retain the basic structure, but just eliminate some of the things. And by eliminate on here, I more mean lump under different sections. So there are the existing conditions and review of plans and policies as part of the original document. As part of the state of walking and biking, we have kind of consolidated those. So while I say eliminate chapters, it's not necessarily getting rid of the content, it's just getting rid of the chapter itself in the document. So it would streamline the amount of chapters as well.
Before you move on, go back a page. That Sharrow symbol, Sharrows are absolutely useless. They're put on high-stress streets to encourage the strong 2 or 3% to ride out there. The strong 2 or 3% are going to be out there anyway, and the 8-year-old and the 80-year-old are not going to be riding there whether or not there is a Sharrow. So we should not put a lot of resources into putting Sharrows out, it seems to me.
Bill?
I don't totally agree with that. The Sharrows are there not for the bikes, but for the drivers, to make them more aware. And even better when they have the Sharrows with a green box, or sometimes a few of them have a Sharrow and then dotted green lines going on.
So are we on the right track with the intent of the update for what we intend to do with the consolidation and streamlining? Is that everyone kind of in agreement on that one? Okay. I'll hand it over to Brad for next steps.
Okay, so what we're going to do in the next month and a half is to put together an administrative draft countywide bike ped plan. And we're hoping to review it at your next meeting, which is scheduled for the 22nd. But we would like to move that, if it's okay with the committee, a week later. We have 5 Mondays in January this next year to give us an extra week and to give you some more time to review the document. So if it's okay, we can reschedule the meeting to the 29th of January. Same time. Same station.
If I could be so bold, getting this document on Saturday didn't really leave enough time to read it.
That's why we want to have that extra week, to make sure that you have more time.
So if we don't have the document for a week, then postpone the meeting again.
Okay.
Thanks.
Any other comments on that date? I'm fine with the 28th. Or 29th, sorry.
Normal time is the 22nd. It's the fourth Monday. We normally meet the fourth Monday.
We could talk about whether we want to change our regular meeting date. I forced the issue whenever we started this committee, and my reason for that has gone away now, so we can have it any day of the month you want.
Well, we can agendize that for another meeting.
Yeah, I think we should do it when more people are here.
Yeah, I don't want to force the issue to officially discuss it. I'm just saying I'm cool on changing the day.
And 29th works for me, your original question.
Okay, good. Okay, we'll reschedule it for the 29th.
Actually, what Patrick was going over, that was item number 8, correct? The draft outline?
Yes.
Okay, we just move to that. Okay. Thank you, Patrick. We'll move to item number 9, the MTC's Active Transportation Working Group. I guess they have an agenda in here, or was it a past? I guess just give a recap, Brad, on that meeting.
Yeah, the last meeting was really just focusing on number 2, which MTC has to set targets for safety, as one of the state is required to have them. The MPOs are required to have them. Basically, MTC has decided that they're going to just take the state's targets, which are pretty ambitious. I can't remember exactly what they are, but they are very, very ambitious targets. And it was a phone-in meeting. There's really just this particular item on it. That's my report.
Actually, I have a question on that, Brad. So how, these new targets, how would it affect, what effect would it have on the CBPAC, Countywide Bike Ped Plan, future PBTF?
Nothing direct. It may have, and I'm pretty sure that neither the region nor the state will meet these targets. They're that ambitious. That there may be some changes in emphasis or amount of funding going towards safety projects. May affect the HISIP program, the Highway Safety Improvement Program, and how projects are selected for that. But it's not really clear yet what the effects of not meeting them are.
Okay, thanks. All right, let's move on to item number 10, other business / information sharing. Does any of the CBPAC members have any questions or comments? Bruce?
Yeah, Dick Anderson is in the hospital. He's a member of this committee. He's in room 5509, I think, in John Muir over here on Ignacio Valley. He's been there for 2.5 weeks now. Then he was home. We're working backwards now for a week and a half, and then he was in the hospital again from a fall off his bicycle for 2 weeks. And it was a life-threatening event when he had to go back into the hospital. So anyway, go and visit him or send him an email if you would. Dick Anderson, Richard Anderson, he's a good guy.
Wrong committee.
Oh, wrong committee. Well, he's still a bicyclist.
All right, any other comments? Thank you for that, Bruce. Yeah, any other comments? All right, if none, we'll move to item 11. All right, we'll adjourn to the next scheduled CBPAC meeting, which will be moved to January 29th, 2018 at 11 a.m. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.